Thanks for joining us. My name is Ibrahim Sani. This is The Economy. I'm currently at the Ipsos Malaysia office, and in the makeshift studio that we have right now, we have a treat. Here is Ben Page, the Global CEO of Ipsos. Ben, I've been working with Ipsos for quite a bit right now. I'm very familiar with the work that Ipsos Malaysia does, and of course, at the global stage, you sit across various markets, various industries, and the geopolitical moment right now is perhaps one of the most interesting times for a company like yours to actually observe, and the word I'm looking for is capture.
Right.
So what is the sentiment right now? Is it as crazy as it is for a bystander, somebody pedestrian like me, or is it really something more significant?
We've just had over 1.6 billion people vote in elections last year, which is one of the largest demonstrations of democracy anywhere in the world, and in human history, actually. And of course, the most common thing that happened in those elections is that it didn't matter whether governments were left-wing or right-wing, incumbents were punished by voters all over the world because they're living through this cost of living crisis, the post-pandemic inflation. And so there's a general sort of sense of frustration. Actually, Asia is somewhat more optimistic than the rest of the world, partly because it's younger. But in general, everywhere, voters are frustrated, angry, and out to get politicians. In my own country, Keir Starmer was elected with a huge majority by historic standards, and yet within 6 months, his level of popularity had collapsed. So and this is after being in opposition since 2010. So he's been out of power for, 14 years, gets back, and within 6 months, people are fed up because people's patience is just exhausted, I think, now. So it's a really tough time to be a politician. It's quite a tough time to be in business, to be honest, because I think the world is, we are in a time of transition, I think. I call this we're in the middle of a restless decade.
But of course, many of the politicians tend to make outlandish promises to get into office, and it's obvious that most of the politicians, once into office, they tend to backtrack. That is a common phenomenon.
Sure.
So how are things different right now?
In the case of the UK, I think it's the opposite. It's an excess of caution, because the Labour Party in the United Kingdom were determined not to be able to be undermined by the governing Conservative Party in the spring of last year. And so they made a promise not to put up a sales tax, not to put up taxes on income. And as a result, they boxed themselves in. So they then get elected and find out, oh God, what are we going to do? And so they've had to make some relatively unpopular choices. I think their strategy is to take the pain early on and hope that people will recognise that they've got growth and the economy is growing. They feel better off in 5 years' time. They do have until 2029 to have another election. So we'll see. And a week is a long time in politics, as they say. So, but overall, yes, they make promises, they break them, and that's part of the. But I think who would want to be a politician? The choices are tough. The thing about politicians, we all criticise them. And of course, I look at their reputation all over the world, and they are one of the least trustworthy professions in virtually any country. But at the same time, I can tell you that in Malaysia, United States, Japan, Britain, France, you name it, if there was a simple and easy solution to the problems facing a country, any politician of any colour would do it immediately.
Of course.
And often, I think, it's voters not accepting that there are hard choices to be made. And that is where, of course, populists will come in particular populists, left or right, have come in and said, well, I've got a simple answer. And it's very attractive until it, of course, turns out not to work.
Yeah, the silver bullet moment will never work, I suppose. I want to pivot back to the statement that you said earlier. In terms of life is not just hard for politicians and policy makers, it's also hard for businesses. How do you think businesses are now reacting towards all the risks that is currently existing? And of course, many of the instances that are currently happening in terms of the geopolitical space can be factored in. It has been priced in. Many of the risks premium have been measured. Are businesses reacting well, knowing that it will be hard anyway? But have they factored that in?
I think obviously it varies hugely by sector and region. And actually, public trust in business, interestingly, globally, has actually been rising since the global financial crisis. But I think for businesses themselves, it's just the pressure for, particularly for public companies, and I speak as a public company CEO, you know, this need to balance the short term and long term, to make those investments that may not pay off immediately, to balance your portfolio and your geopolitical risk. All of those things are probably trickier than you know, at any time in the past, because of how quickly technology accelerates. I mean, in our own company, we're 20,000 people around the world. 13,000 of them are now certified in using AI on a platform that we have internally that didn't exist 18 months ago.
Of course.
I mean, when I did my last business plan in 2022, we talked about analytics and algorithms. We didn't talk about generative AI because that AI really only launched in the autumn of 2022, these general large language models. So just that speed of transition that we're now seeing, I think does make it difficult. And it will be, but I still think it will be people who have a long-term view, are able to take a long-term view, well-run companies, of course, as well, and make those difficult decisions will probably be okay. But it is tough. I mean, the tenure of chief executives, I think, is, you know, averaging sort of 3 to 5 years.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't have long to reap the benefits or rewards of anything that you're doing.
But much can be said about the politics as well.
Absolutely.
We don't see politicians having a 2-term, 3-term moment.
No, that's that's absolutely right. I mean, again, fascinating in America to see Joe Biden get kicked out after 2. Normally, you get 2 terms. Donald Trump is only the second time in history that somebody gets kicked out and then comes back for a second term, but after another party has been in charge for a while. So generally, you know, there's just less and less, I suppose, less and less goodwill is the way I would describe it, whether you're in politics or business. And that's tough.
Let's talk about...
And there's more scrutiny.
No, absolutely. So, for instance, and support for some strange policies or policies that we haven't seen before. For instance, the tariff hike that will impact how Canada and Mexico, for instance, are looking into doing business with America, China as well. Maybe we can talk to the effect of the Global South development. Do you feel that the Global South resurgence is going to take place right now?
Well, I mean, it's where all the people are. I mean, we're sitting in this, if you look at the map of where all the people are and when the middle classes are emerging, of course, it is in Asia. The world, the economic center of the world is moving away from the West to the Global South, towards Asia. And navigating that, and this move from the world of the late 20th century, the unipolar world dominated by Washington, to a much more complex world. I think countries like Malaysia you know, can be friends with a lot of people and probably need to be. Yes, I think overall, in the end, demography in a sense is destiny. The interesting thing is in the last decade or so, it started to become evident that this massive population surge that benefited Asia with lots of new workers coming into expanded manufacturing, of course, is now starting to peter out. I think the population of this country has now been in decline, you know, birth rate's been in decline since 2007. And so the question is, do we get old before we get rich? China, of course, the country is already shrinking. So it's a really interesting time. I mean, the answer is nobody knows what the end result is. I think the interesting thing on the birth rate, though, is that ultimately it is partly about economics, but it's also about culture. Women want to be able to self-actualize. They want to have careers. They want freedom. And even if you say, I'm going to pay for a creche and a flat, if you're looking after young children, you're still not, quote unquote, free. So it's a really interesting time. But yes, overall, I mean, we should remember this actually when we're looking at the challenges the world faces. I mean, just look at, here we are surrounded by buildings that weren't here 20 years ago. The level of growth, the number of millions of people who've been lifted out of poverty, overall, the arc of progress is still there. It's just that we're sort of frustrated, and we want what's, you know, the human beings always want more. And sometimes we should perhaps stop and just look back at where we've come from.
There's a lot of pivots that I want to take from that particular statement. Number one, let's talk about inequality with women in the workforce, how women is not being measured in terms of doing work at home. House husbands are now on the rise, especially in Malaysia, because women, the spouse is
and they
doing
they
a lot
more. They often perform better in higher education, which is something we see all over the world.
Where do you feel the level of inequity and inequality when it comes to women in the workforce, and what do you think of Malaysia right now?
Well, I'm not familiar with the detailed stats on Malaysia, so I'll rely on you for those, Ibrahim. But what I would say is that you can see all over the world women recognising and being less accepting of inequality at work, the gender pay gap. I mean, we're making progress on reducing it, I think, but only, it needs, what gets measured gets done. It needs more attention. So in some of the markets we're in, we publish the gender pay gap. By law, you're required to. And I think that sort of thing is really helpful. I'm not sure that happens in Malaysia. So it needs attention.
It's not.
Yeah, I think what gets measured gets done. And
I would say it hasn't.
Right.
Or haven't.
And I think you probably, to be honest, if you want progress, and it's a sensitive subject, and I see America, of course, now big companies that are big in America rowing back on it. You need quotas. So I, for example, as a global CEO, part of my bonus depends on the number of women at senior levels in my company. And I'm fine with that, because it's illogical in a company that is 62% female that only 40% of the senior managers should be women. And why is that? And so and I think if you don't set targets, you don't make progress. I mean, you might not want to set targets, but if you don't make progress. And so I think we need to, if you hope for the best, that usually in virtually every sphere of life does not work. Yeah, we've been hoping for the best for, I don't know, yonks. Yes, so you actually, on all of these issues, sensitive and difficult though they are, and unfashionable though they are, you need to set quotas. In our case, what I would say is that we don't change our principles when governments change. So you mentioned that demography is in essence your destiny, but there's also another saying when it comes to if you're a friend to everyone, you're a friend to none. Following back to that whole idea, what should be the Global South's destiny, I suppose? I'm sure building relationships with new organizations, new blocks, does come at a price. I mean, the Western world is now making a lot of fuss for Indonesia joining BRICS, for instance. Malaysia is now being cozying up with BRICS. We're not a full member yet, but that's another round of. I mean, it comes down to, in the end, it comes down to what are you bringing to the market? It is a market, and so you've got your resources, you've got your people. But I think, Singapore is a really interesting example of a country with actually not that much natural resources. And I met Mr. Lee Kuan Yew when he was still alive, and I was incredibly impressed. We had he reminded me of some of the other very effective politicians that I've met, like Tony Blair, even though he was very old at the time. There's an example of how you can actually steer a country to be successful in a global marketplace. And I think it takes iron will, and in some ways it's easier to do it in somewhere that's as small as Singapore than it is perhaps a more complex, bigger society like Malaysia, with all of its history and different groupings. But nevertheless, we can see these examples around the world. Denmark, there are lots of small countries like Denmark, which are incredibly successful, happy. Sometimes it's easier to do when you're more homogenous. And you have, clear governance. If the elite can't agree on how to run the place, it can be more difficult. Some of our problems, interesting. I mean, America is fascinating in this sense. America's problems, where do they come from? America, nearly always. I mean, under all our one of our businesses looks at the long-term future. So we work for global companies on what will be the future of the chip industry, or what will happen to container shipping in 50 years' time. And on all of those scenarios, when you look at geographies and countries, the United States, climate change, yes, okay, Florida's underwater, but actually it'll be okay. Running out of energy, no problem, got plenty. War, hard to invade, surrounded by large oceans on each side. So America, under all scenarios, Europe, where I come from, huge problems over the next 30 or 40 years. America, its only problems are itself.
But nobody has quite put it that way before.
Yeah, right, but
it is true.
America has to learn to be a multiracial democracy.
Yeah, well,
and that is a difficult thing.
Especially with Trump running the show.
Yeah.
Let's help our viewers right now.
Yeah.
Many of them are policymakers. Of course, most of them are senior executives, perhaps even business owners themselves are watching this conversation with us right now or listening to this conversation right now on podcast. Let's talk about some solutioning, I suppose.
Okay.
Do you feel that if we really truly embrace, say for instance, tools like artificial intelligence in policymaking, that would actually move the needle in terms of finding solutions?
I'm not sure if AI itself is going to tell you the answer. It's usually about the combination of human intelligence and AI. I see AI as more about giving you the ability to process very large amounts of information infinitely quicker than just a few years ago to get productivity gains. I'm not sure it will give you new insights on its own into some of the solutions. But at the same time, of course, in so many countries, and one of the great privileges of this job, which is about studying human societies and business and brands and politics in 90 countries, is that you see that so many countries actually, so Malaysia, you know, we've got to do something about skills, you've got to do something about human capital, you've got to share, look at how you distribute resources inside the society. And it's the same actually in the country I come from, the United Kingdom. You know, we know the problems of the United Kingdom, a lack of infrastructure investment, which is common in many developed societies, maybe here as well. A need to, in my own country, a need to invest in skills, a need to build more affordable housing, invest in education, and in our case healthcare, because we're an aging society, far older than Malaysia. And yet we know what to do, but the challenge is, and this is where the politics comes into it, it generally involves different interest groups making compromises. Everybody has to give something away, and nobody is at the moment in many societies, no group is uncomfortable enough to compromise, whether it's on their identity, sharing resources. And it's easy for me to say this. I'm not a politician. I'm just a businessman. But that's the challenge, and I think that's where political leadership comes into it. And that's why I go back to the history of Singapore under that leadership. We need that leadership, that ability to build compromises and coalitions. And that's what we seem to find as human beings so difficult. It's easy to say that, of course, watching from outside, but we do know the solutions. We just don't want to do them.
So does this mean that this is a breeding ground for strong-handed politicians? Maybe not dictatorial in nature, that's not what I'm trying to get at, but people like Lee Kuan Yew, or even in Malaysia, Tun Mahathir, Tony Blair. Therefore, don't you think that somebody like Donald Trump is that prescription that is needed?
Well, he's got elected. I mean, and actually, one of the things, we do an annual study of populism around the world, and in most countries, a large majority of people, or a lot of people, say we need a strong leader who breaks the rules. Well, in America, that's what they've just elected, but that's what they said they wanted. I think the challenge with, it's interesting to look at the countries that don't want a strong leader that breaks the rules. They're often countries that have had them in living memory. So Spain, General Franco, Germany, they're rather less keen on it. But in general, people are frustrated. Yes, they like that idea. They just want somebody to break the, to break through. With Trump, we'll see. I mean, he got a 1.5% lead in the popular vote. Let's see what happens.
And of course, that whole idea of if AI is not going to be the silver bullet that we speak of,
well,
maybe a tool.
It might improve productivity. We'll see. I mean, I think the other thing is it's just very early days. But if you look at other technologies, the introduction of electricity, the automotive, generally the productivity gains come some time after they're first introduced. So AI may, we've got amazing social media and IT, but actually our productivity gains over the last 20 years have been, in many societies, relatively minor. It may be that we're not measuring productivity in the right way, but no, so we will see. I don't think it's a silver bullet at the moment.
Now, what about talent development and human capital development? Where do we stand on that?
Well, I mean, again, that's where we need to invest more. Sometimes I think it's also true that a lot of government spending in this space is wasted with ineffective schemes. Business needs to invest more, but of course, people like me, I want to spend more on developing my people, particularly their leadership, their management skills, I need more people to develop their code, certain elements of coding or use of AI. The challenge, of course, is you have the tyranny of short-term results. You know, so I could treble or double my investment, but if I spend too much on it, it will affect my bottom line in the short term, and my investors will complain because the quarterly results were not good enough. So it's a delicate balance. But I think the businesses that get that right will build long-term advantage.
What about wages? Do you feel that that plays a very key important role?
Well, it's like many businesses in professional services. My largest thing is our wage costs. I mean, actually, that plays to somewhere like Malaysia's advantage because it's now so expensive to employ people in Singapore. Singapore is now more expensive than London. Singapore, London, and New York. Actually, what we're now doing, and it's the reason we have 700 people based here, is building teams. So it's not treating Malaysia as a back office, but because there are lots of great English-speaking graduates here in Kuala Lumpur and elsewhere, you're actually building joint Malaysian English, Malaysian American, Malaysian Australian, Malaysian Singaporean teams and getting them to work on client problems together. And that's, there is a comparative advantage that Malaysia has in terms of, access to skilled labour at a lower cost. So people like me are wanting to employ more people and grow here. And I think that can only be good for Malaysia in the short term. The long term, you want to, of course, own companies, like create a company like this yourselves, of course.
In terms of skating to where the puck is going to be, where do you see industries or sectors that would be benefiting the most in terms of all these changes in global challenges that lie ahead of us? Do you feel that some sectors are going to win more than the others? And
tech and pharma are two obvious ones. That I mean, because look at who my biggest clients are. So 10 or 15 years ago, our largest clients were people like Procter & Gamble and Unilever, consumer packaged goods companies, and they're still a very important part of our portfolio because they need to understand how attractive this soap powder is, or can I sell these new razors? But of course, actually, our biggest clients now are tech companies, which just shows their role in the economy, in a knowledge economy, in terms of and also the advertising market. You know, it's dominated now by people like Google, Meta, Amazon, etc. So that is going to keep growing, and AI, of course, they're investing billions in AI to maintain that position. But the other thing I think is really interesting is healthcare and pharma, because it is possible that the person who will live to be 1,000 has now been born, probably somewhere in California. And if they can find a way of turning off the aging of mitochondria in your DNA, then you won't, your longevity will be massively extended. How that will play out, we're not sure. But I think what's very interesting is looking at seeing how AI allows pharma to now create new drugs, new formulas, or understand cellular biology in ways that were just not possible before. And so that's, I think, a really exciting area.
Sorry, you just caught my attention. So what does that mean? What are they looking for from somebody like a company like yourself?
Well, all we're doing, of course, is understanding what humans think about things, and helping people make decisions about making their advertising more effective, or they will be the work we do for pharma companies is about understanding about how do patients take drugs, why do they not take the drugs in the way that they're told to, or the way the doctor, the clinicians say that they should, attitudes of pharmacists to prescribing and that type of thing. I'm not a scientist, I'm an opinion pollster in that sense, but I'm using that as an example of an area of an economy that's likely to grow, and I can just see this. The other thing is robotics. The cost of a humanoid robot equipped with AI is falling very, very rapidly, and that's again that has huge potential. I mean, some of it's worrying. Well, it depends, but it shows that business is going to need to invest more capital, and that, I think, is a challenge for some businesses. If you don't have,
but cheap capital is in Asia.
Yes, you've got it, but there's an interesting question about whether it will become. Will we see AI become a universal tool that even small businesses can use and build discrete models that are unique to them, or which is what DeepSeek, of course, comes out recently, freely available to everybody, or will it be that you will need to be, there will be masters of this technology that will be protected, and there will be hegemons get created like Amazon. When the internet first started, people originally believed that all mom and pop stores would be able to have a store on the internet and sell things, and all musicians would now be able to distribute. And actually what we've seen instead, interestingly, is massive agglomeration effects, where there is only one Amazon in many markets, and they've wiped out everybody else.
Yes,
there's only one music service, one or two music services. And actually for the artist, you know, everybody listens to Beyonce, and all these other artists are struggling.
Kendrick Lamar right now. Therefore, do you feel that because capital can be cheap in Asia, talent can be cheap in Asia, office spaces, everything can be cheap in Asia?
Therefore, let's wait for these Asian giants to, you know, that we need to see more. We would expect to see more Asian giants, and in fact, there are quite a lot of huge players that were not around 20 years ago, but still, America is still a major competitor.
Yes,
I think how governments here tread this path between China, with all of its resources and increasing tech, and America is going to be a really interesting balance. And of course, if you're clever, like some countries, you play them both off against each other to get what you want from them.
And smaller nations tend to be crafty at that point.
Yes, yes.
All right, okay. Distilling this conversation to just one or two views, is 2025 an interesting year as compared to the years before? Do you feel that should businesses lie and wait? And for those young aspirants of us watching right now, is politics a career path that they should think about?
I think there's always certain people attracted to politics. It's become more and more of a specialist field. In years gone by, people were business people and later went into politics. These days, to be really effective in politics, you almost have to be born into it, because like broadcasting, it has a set of particular skills. And business people who think they can just go into politics and it will be easy, in many countries, come rapidly unstuck. It's always a disaster in Britain, because they suddenly say something interesting, and then the media descend on them.
It would be fine if it's in the business space, or commercial space.
Well, even in business, you have to be pretty careful about what you say or don't say. That was your last question, but what was the question before?
It's 2025.
I mean, I think basically uncertainty is the new normal. I mean, I'm a man who looks, I remember in the period before the global financial crisis in 2008, I was starting to travel around the world. I was doing well in my career. It seemed pretty hard and busy. And then, of course, 2008 happened, and I was like, oh God, weren't those days so good back in 2005, 2004, etc. So, it's always, the times are always tough and challenging, but I do think there does seem to be more uncertainty. That means building resilience. I think one thing that business can do is to make some space in your schedules for thinking about what if. So we've just completed an exercise, and we're a research company, of course. We've looked at what our industry might be like in 2035, because as William Gibson, the futurist, says, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So and that's very impactful for our thinking about where we need to invest. And it means taking some risk, managed risk. But if you just put your head in the sand and say you're going to wait until it's clear, you've probably lost.
So action, move now.
You have
take risks.
A sense of urgency, but controlled risks, but a sense of urgency, I think.
A sense of controlled urgency.
Yes. Festina lente. I did Festina lente, as Augustus Caesar used to say. Hurry slowly.
Yes. Awesome. This has been a riveting conversation. That was Ben Page, the Global CEO of Ipsos. I personally have been working with Ipsos for quite some time, since I was in the banking days, and of course right now, even with opinion work. I'm very proud of what Ipsos has been building, and of course there's more to come.
Thank you.
Ben Page, Global CEO of Ipsos. You missed out on any part of this interview, just head on to astro.com. You can just search for Ipsos or The Economy or Niaga AWANI. Those are the keywords that you can actually search for on our website. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next one.